The laughter hit Harry before the words did. "Bike boy!" Officer Daniels sneered, his voice carrying across the school lot like a siren. Students turned, snickering as the cop tapped Harry's helmet with his baton, the plastic wobbling like a toy. In that moment, the boy's freedom, the bike he loved, was turned into a weapon of humiliation. The morning air was cool, crisp, and still heavy with dew. The streets stretched wide and quiet, bathed in the golden light of a sun just beginning to climb. Birds sang from rooftops, a gentle breeze rattled through trees, and in the middle of that calm rolled the steady rhythm of bicycle wheels. Harry Jin pedaled hard, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders, the chain on his bike clicking with every turn. His shoes pressed down in practiced rhythm. 1-2, 1-2, the steady beat of someone who had long ago gotten used to traveling this way. To him, this wasn't just a bike. It was his freedom, his independence, his way of moving through a city that didn't always welcome him. But to the world watching, it looked like something else. Cars whizzed by, shiny and loud, their engines purring like beasts. Inside them, kids his age sat in leather seats, scrolling on their phones or sipping sodas from drive-through cups. They barely noticed Harry as they passed. And when they did, it wasn't admiration they felt. It was dismissal. A boy on a bike, too poor for a car, too poor for anything else. Harry knew what they thought, even if they didn't say it. He had felt those eyes before, the quick glances, the faint smirks, the unspoken words. But he pushed harder on the pedals anyway. The school came into view, its brick walls tall and intimidating, windows catching the morning light. The lot outside was already filling with cars, parents dropping off their kids in gleaming SUVs and polished sedans. Harry rolled toward the bike rack, weaving between the line of vehicles like a lone swimmer against a current. He parked his bike, set the kickstand, and tugged the lock through the frame. His fingers moved slow, heavy with the feeling that someone was watching. And someone was. Across the lot, leaning against his cruiser, stood Officer Daniels. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a jaw that always seemed set in judgment, Daniels wore his uniform like armor. His badge gleamed in the morning light. His mirrored sunglasses hid his eyes, but Harry didn't need to see them to know the look. The smirk said it all. Daniels pushed himself off the hood of his car, slow and deliberate, every step heavy against the pavement. He didn't head toward the other kids. He didn't glance at the polished cars. He had only one target. Harry. The boy felt the weight of that attention before a word was spoken. His throat tightened. He tried to focus on the lock, on the click of the chain, on anything but the officer's shadow stretching closer. And then the voice came. "Well, well," Daniels said, his tone dripping with amusement. "Look what we've got here, riding your little bike to school like it's 1955. The words carried across the lot, sharp enough to make a few students turn their heads. Some snickered, others leaned closer, eager for the show. Harry froze. His fingers slipped from the lock. He stared at the handlebars, willing himself not to react. Daniels chuckled, stepping closer, his boots echoing against the concrete. "What's the matter, son? Daddy too broke to buy you a car? Or maybe Mama couldn't save enough from all those government checks?" Laughter rippled through the group of kids gathering nearby. It wasn't everyone, but it was enough. Enough to sting. Harry's chest burned, his face flushed hot. He wanted to shout back, to say something, anything that would make it stop, but the words caught in his throat. He bent to grab his backpack, but Daniels wasn't finished. The officer reached out and tapped the helmet still hooked on the bike's handlebar. The plastic wobbled, swinging like a toy. Daniels grinned. "This your big ride, huh? What's next?" Training wheels? The crowd broke again, laughter echoing against the brick walls of the school. Harry gripped the strap of his backpack, his knuckles white. He wanted to disappear, to melt into the pavement, to ride so far away no one could ever find him. But instead, he stood frozen, the sting of humiliation burning hotter than the sun climbing overhead. And Daniels? He just smiled wider, soaking in the moment. To him, this wasn't about safety. It wasn't about law and order. It was about power. And in that parking lot, with kids laughing and Harry standing silent, Daniels felt like he had all of it. The bell rang in the distance, shrill and demanding, cutting through the laughter. Students began to scatter toward the doors, still whispering, still chuckling. But Daniels stayed where he was, arms folded, smirk plastered on his face. Harry turned away without a word, his backpack slung heavy on his shoulders, his head bowed just enough to hide the tears threatening to rise. He walked toward the school doors, the sound of laughter chasing him like a shadow. And behind him, Daniels called out one last time, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Don't be late, bike boy!" The words followed Harry through the doors, echoing in his ears long after the laughter had faded. And this was only the beginning. The classroom buzzed with the usual chaos of morning, backpacks thudding onto desks, pencils tapping, whispers floating from one row to another. The hum of fluorescent lights overhead mixed with the chatter, a restless energy that filled the space before the bell even finished ringing. Harry slid into his seat near the middle row, his backpack heavy on the floor beside him. He opened his notebook, pretending to write, but his mind was still back in the parking lot. The laughter. The helmet wobbling under Daniel's baton. The sting of being called Bike Boy. He tried to focus on the equations scribbled on the board, but the memory pressed harder, echoing in his ears. He could still hear the chuckles, still feel the smirks, still sense the eyes that had burned into him like spotlights. And then, as if summoned by those thoughts, the door swung open. Officer Daniels stepped in. The room stilled almost instantly. Conversations cut short. A few students straightened in their seats. Others leaned forward with eager grins. Daniels didn't just enter. He filled the room. His uniform crisp, his boots heavy against the tile, his badge gleaming like a warning sign. He wasn't scheduled to be there. Everyone knew that, but nobody questioned it. Not when it was him. Daniel scanned the room slowly, like a predator circling prey. And then his eyes landed exactly where everyone knew they would. On Harry. "Well, if it isn't my little cyclist," he said, loud enough for every ear to catch. "Didn't get lost on your way here? You managed to keep up with the traffic this morning?" A ripple of laughter spread across the rows. Some kids smirked, others leaned back, waiting for more. Harry stiffened. His pencil froze mid-word. He didn't look up. He couldn't. But Daniels wasn't finished. He stepped further inside, moving down the aisle, every step deliberate. "Tell me, boy," he said, circling Harry's desk like a shark. "Your daddy too broke to buy you a car? Or maybe he's too busy running from the law?" That landed harder than the rest. A few kids gasped. Others laughed louder. One boy covered his mouth, whispering to his friend, but his shoulders shook with cruel amusement. Harry gripped the edge of his desk, his nails biting into the wood. His throat burned, but he forced himself to sit tall. He couldn't cry, not here, not in front of them. Daniels leaned down slightly, tapping Harry's helmet with the tip of his baton. The plastic wobbled again, just like it had outside. "This your big ride, huh?" "What's next? Training wheels?" The class broke into laughter. Not everyone, but enough. Enough to wrap around Harry like a net, tightening with every giggle, every snicker. He wanted to yell, to stand up, to tell Daniels he had no right. But what good would it do? Words against a cop in uniform? He'd lose before he even started. Daniels straightened, then leaned close again, his voice dropping so only Harry and the first row could hear. "You'll never be more than this. A poor kid on a busted bike, going nowhere. Don't ever forget that." Those words cut deeper than the laughter. They weren't loud, but they stuck. They lodged themselves in Harry's chest, heavy, sharp, unshakable. His fists clenched under the desk until his knuckles ached. Still, he stayed silent. The silence was his only armor. The bell rang, shrill and freeing. Students jumped from their seats, scrambling for their bags. The noise swelled, chatter and footsteps filling the room again. Daniel straightened, smirking like a man proud of his work. "Stay out of trouble, son," he said, the sarcasm dripping with every word. Then he tipped his hat, turned, and strutted out as if nothing had happened. Harry stayed seated until the room emptied. His so-called friends, those who might have spoken up, avoided his eyes. They slipped out quickly, their silence louder than any insult. At last, the room was quiet. Harry's chest heaved, though no tears fell. He stared at his notebook, the numbers blurred, his pencil snapped in two between his fingers. He finally stood, slow and heavy. He picked up his helmet, holding it like it weighed more than stone. His legs felt weak, but he moved anyway, one step after another, down the empty aisle and out into the hall. The laughter still echoed, even though the hall was nearly silent. Every whisper seemed pointed at him. Every glance carried judgment. Outside, the bike waited for him, chained to the rack like it had been loyal through it all. He touched the handlebars, the same ones his father had fixed just last month, and swallowed hard. To Harry, the bike wasn't shame. It was freedom. It was the only way he could move through the city on his own terms. But after today, even that freedom felt stolen. He unlocked the chain, slipped the helmet on, and pedaled away. Each turn of the pedals felt heavier, slower, as if Daniel's words clung to him like weights. By the time he reached his block, his chest still burned. The words repeated, over and over. A poor kid on a busted bike, going nowhere. And for the first time, Harry wondered if maybe, just maybe, Daniels was right. The ride home was quiet. Too quiet. Harry's tires hissed against the pavement, carrying him block by block through familiar streets. The houses passed in a blur, peeling paint on porches, sagging fences, kids dribbling basketballs on cracked driveways. Normally, the rhythm of it soothed him, the wind in his face, the freedom of moving faster than his thoughts. But not today. Today, the sound of laughter clung to him like shadows. Every push of the pedals felt like it dragged Daniel's words along for the ride. Poor kid, busted bike, going nowhere. By the time he turned onto his street, his chest was tight. His own house came into view, standing steady at the end of the block. White siding, blue shutters, a porch with a swing that creaked when the wind blew too hard. It should have felt like home. It should have been safe. But Harry's heart sank as he rolled up the driveway. His father's car was there, which meant Dickson Gin was already home. Dickson wasn't just any man. He was a figure carved from discipline. Tall, broad, with a presence that filled every room. Years of service had sharpened him, polished him into someone people respected, sometimes even feared. At home, he was still loving, but stern. His words carried weight. His gaze, even when soft, always seemed to see more than Harry wanted him to. And Harry wasn't ready for that gaze. Not tonight. He set the bike gently against the porch rail, as if delaying the sound that might give him away. His hand hovered over the door handle. His breath caught. Maybe he could just sneak upstairs. Maybe Dickson wouldn't notice. But when he stepped inside, the rich aroma of stew hit him first. Then the voice. "Harry?" It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Dickson's voice always carried. Harry swallowed hard. "Yeah, Dad, it's me. In here." The kitchen was warm, filled with the smell of simmering broth and herbs. Dickson stood at the counter, stirring a pot, still in his work clothes, dark slacks, button-down shirt, sleeves rolled to his forearms. He turned when Harry entered, his sharp eyes scanning his son the way they always did. "How was school?" The question was casual, routine, but Harry froze anyway. His fingers fidgeted with the strap of his backpack. "It was fine." Dickson tilted his head, studying him. "Fine?" Harry nodded quickly, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just normal, you know?" But Dickson wasn't convinced. He set the spoon down, wiped his hands on a towel, and leaned against the counter. "You're quiet." Quieter than usual. Harry shifted in his seat at the table, trying to avoid his father's eyes. The stew bubbled softly, filling the silence. Finally, Harry said, "It's nothing. Just tired." Dickson didn't press further. Not yet. Instead, he ladled the stew into bowls, set them on the table, and sat across from his son. They ate in silence for a while, the only sounds the clink of spoons and the creak of the old table. But Harry couldn't shake it, couldn't bury it. Daniels's words played over and over in his head, so loud they almost drowned out the clatter of dishes. Hopeless, poor, going nowhere. He pushed the stew around with his spoon, appetite gone. Dickson noticed. "You're not eating." "I'm not that hungry." "Harry," Dickson said firmly, his voice carrying that familiar edge of authority. "What happened today?" The words hit harder than Harry expected. He froze, spoon halfway to his mouth. His father's eyes bore into him, steady and unrelenting. He knew lying wouldn't work. He never could lie to Dickson. Still, he tried. "Nothing. I told you, it was fine." Dickson leaned forward, folding his arms on the table. His tone softened, but only slightly. "Son, look at me." Harry's eyes lifted reluctantly. "You can't hide from me," Dickson said. "Not your words. Not your face. I know when something's eating at you. So, tell me, what happened?" The truth burned at Harry's throat. He wanted to spill it all. The parking lot, the classroom, the laughter, the shame. But the fear was stronger. What if his father saw him as weak? What if he thought Daniels was right? What if he believed he really was hopeless? Harry dropped his gaze again, staring into the stew he hadn't touched. "It was just a long day," he murmured. Dickson studied him for a long moment, then sighed. He didn't push further. "All right, long day, but tomorrow you'll face it again. And the day after that. You understand?" Harry nodded, though his chest ached. "Yeah, Dad." "Good." Dickson leaned back in his chair, his gaze still sharp. "Because no matter what happens out there, you keep your head up. Always. You hear me?" "Yes, sir." The meal ended in silence. Harry excused himself early, climbing the stairs with heavy steps. His room was dark, his bed waiting. But when he lay down, sleep didn't come. Instead, the voices returned. The laughter. The baton tapping his helmet. The cruel words whispered like a curse. Poor kid. Busted bike. Going nowhere. Harry buried his face in the pillow, but the noise followed him into the night. And for the first time, he wondered if his father's lessons about dignity and strength would ever be enough. The next morning came too quickly. Harry's alarm buzzed before the sun had even stretched its arms across the city. He lay there in the dim light, staring at the ceiling, replaying yesterday over and over. Daniels's smirk, the laughter in the classroom, his father's eyes, sharp and probing across the dinner table. It all felt like a storm building inside him, heavy and impossible to ignore. When he finally dragged himself out of bed, his legs felt like lead. He dressed slowly, his hands fumbling with the buttons on his shirt. Downstairs, Dickson was already gone. An early meeting at the precinct, no doubt. A note sat on the kitchen counter beside a plate of eggs. "Keep your head up today. Proud of you. Dad." The words should have lifted him, but instead they felt like more weight pressing down. By the time Harry rolled up to school, the parking lot was alive with the usual chaos. Students piling out of cars, the smell of exhaust hanging in the air, voices spilling in every direction. He parked his bike, locked it, and tugged his helmet free. But the whispers started almost instantly. "There he is. Bike boy. Better watch out. Someone might steal his training wheels." Snickers followed him all the way to the door. Harry kept his eyes down, forcing his feet to keep moving, but each step felt like wading through quicksand, the words pulling him lower, slower. Inside, the halls weren't kinder. A boy shoved past him, muttering just loud enough, "Move it, Lance Armstrong." Another mimicked pedaling, circling him like a cruel mime. Phones tilted up, screens glowing. Harry wanted to disappear, but there was no place to hide. By the time he reached his first class, his stomach was twisted into knots. He slid into his seat, shoulders hunched, praying the teacher would start quickly. But the whispers didn't stop. They rarely did. And then the door opened. Officer Daniels walked in. The room fell into an uneasy hush. Some kids grinned, others straightened in their chairs. They knew what was coming. Daniels had become a show, and Harry was the unwilling star. "Well, well," Daniels said, scanning the room before his eyes landed squarely on Harry. "Didn't expect to see you here this morning. Figured you'd be stuck fixing a flat tire." Laughter rippled across the rows. Harry gripped his pencil so hard it snapped in two. The sound was small, but in the silence it felt like thunder. Daniels strolled closer, his boots echoing on the tile. "Tell me, son, how's the view from the slow lane? You get passed by all the real students on their way in?" More laughter. Phones lifted again, ready to record. This was entertainment now. Cruelty turned into a spectacle. Harry's chest burned, his vision blurred. He felt his fists clench, his jaw tighten. Every part of him screamed to lash out, to throw the words back in Daniel's face. But before he could move, Daniels tapped the helmet still hanging from Harry's desk. The plastic swung, knocking against the wood with a hollow thud. "Careful now," Daniels said with a smirk. "Wouldn't want you to get hurt when you tip over." That broke the room open. Laughter burst like a wave, loud and relentless, crashing over Harry until it drowned out everything else. His heart pounded, his throat ached, the words clawed at him, demanding release. But when he finally opened his mouth, nothing came out. No roar, no defense, just silence. Daniels leaned down, close enough that Harry could smell the sharp tang of coffee on his breath. His voice dropped to a whisper only Harry could hear. "You'll never outrun me, boy. Not on that bike, not in this life. You'll always be beneath us." The words landed like a hammer, crushing what little strength Harry had left. His eyes burned, but he refused to let the tears fall. Not here. Not in front of them. The bell rang, sharp and shrill. Students gathered their bags, still chuckling, still whispering. Daniels tipped his hat once more, smug and satisfied, before striding out the door. The classroom emptied around Harry. His hands trembled as he packed his things, moving slow, careful, like if he moved too fast, he'd shatter completely. When he finally stepped into the hall, the noise of the school swallowed him. Whispers, chuckles, the occasional shout of "Bike boy" that followed him like a curse. By the time he reached his locker, his chest felt like it was caving in. His father's words echoed faintly in his mind. Keep your head up. But how could he? When every head turned only to mock him. He slammed the locker shut, the sound reverberating down the hall. For a moment, silence followed. But then the whispers returned, softer, crueler, like vultures circling. Harry pressed his forehead against the cool metal of the locker, his hands clenched at his sides. And for the first time, he wondered if maybe giving up would be easier than fighting back. Harry stayed at his locker longer than he should have, forehead pressed against the cool steel, breathing in sharp, uneven bursts. For a while, he let the noise of the hallway blur into one distant hum. But eventually, the world pushed forward, as it always did, and he had to move. By the time the final bell rang, he felt drained, as if each minute of the day had clawed another piece of him away. He pedaled home slowly, his legs heavy, his thoughts darker with every turn of the wheels. When the house finally came into view, it looked different. Quieter, heavier somehow. Dickson's car sat in the driveway, which was unusual for that hour. Inside, the smell of coffee lingered. Papers were spread across the dining room table, neat stacks of files marked with the precinct's seal. Dickson sat at the head of the table, shoulders square, jaw tense. He glanced up as Harry stepped in, his eyes sharp but weary. "You're late," Dickson said, though his voice held no heat. Just observation. Harry shrugged, setting his helmet down. "I rode slow." Dickson studied him for a long moment. His son's eyes were bloodshot, his movements sluggish, as if each step cost him something. Dickson wanted to press, but the weight of the day pressed back harder. He had a meeting tonight. An important one. The kind of meeting that would shape the precinct's future. "Get changed," he said finally. "I want you to come with me." Harry's head snapped up. "To the precinct?" Dickson nodded. "You'll sit in the back." "Just listen. I think it's time you see how things work." Harry hesitated. He didn't want to sit in some room full of cops. Not after everything Daniels had done. But the look in his father's eyes told him this wasn't just a request. It was something bigger. Something he couldn't quite name. So he went upstairs, changed into something clean, and followed Dickson out the door. The precinct buzzed with life when they arrived. Phones rang, voices overlapped. The smell of burnt coffee wafted through the air. Harry stayed close to his father, his eyes scanning the uniforms, the badges, the stern faces. It all felt suffocating. Dickson led him into a conference room where several officers were already gathered. A long table stretched across the space, papers and folders scattered on its polished surface. Harry slipped into a seat at the back, trying to make himself invisible. The room quieted when the door opened again. Officer Daniels walked in. Harry's stomach dropped. He sank lower in his chair, praying the officer wouldn't notice him. Daniels strode to a seat near the front, his usual swagger on display, the smirk etched onto his face as though it had been carved there permanently. Dickson didn't acknowledge him, not yet. He set his files on the table, straightened, and took his place at the head of the room. "Gentlemen," ladies." His voice carried authority, steady and sure. "Thank you for being here tonight. I know change isn't easy, but it's necessary. This department is entering a new chapter." Daniels leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, as if bored already. His eyes flicked around the room, settling briefly on Harry in the back. His smirk widened, though he said nothing. Dickson continued. "For too long, certain behaviors have been overlooked. Certain attitudes allowed to fester. That ends now. Effective immediately, this precinct is under new leadership." Whispers rippled across the room. Daniel straightened, his eyes narrowing. Dickson paused, letting the words hang in the air like a challenge. Then he said it. "I am your new police commissioner." The room stilled. Chairs creaked as officers shifted, some in surprise, others in nervous anticipation. Harry's heart leapt into his throat. He sat taller, his eyes fixed on his father. Daniels blinked, confusion flickering across his face. Then disbelief. Then something darker. Fear, though he tried to mask it with a scoff. "You?" he muttered, his voice just loud enough for those nearby to hear. Dickson's gaze sharpened. "Yes, me. And let me be perfectly clear. I will not tolerate disrespect, dishonor, or prejudice in this department. Those days are over." The words cut through the room like a blade. Harry felt them in his bones, each one a hammer striking against the chains Daniels had tried to wrap around him. Daniels shifted in his chair, his bravado cracking at the edges. His eyes darted toward Harry again, and in that moment, recognition bloomed. His smirk faltered, his jaw tightened. Dickson saw it too. He leaned forward, his voice colder now, steel hidden beneath the calm. "And if anyone here doubts my resolve, they should think carefully about their actions, on duty and off." The silence that followed was suffocating. Harry could feel the weight of it pressing down on every man and woman in that room. But for the first time all day, he didn't feel small. He didn't feel broken. He felt seen. Dickson stood tall at the head of the table, his presence undeniable. Daniels, once so smug, sat trapped in his own chair, his arrogance slipping through his fingers like sand. And Harry knew. This was only the beginning. The silence in the conference room was heavy, thick enough to choke on. Every officer sat rigid, watching, waiting. The fluorescent lights hummed above, but even their steady drone felt muted against the tension that gripped the room. Dickson's eyes swept across the table. He saw every uniform, every badge, every face. Some met his gaze with quiet respect. Others looked away, uncertain, nervous. And then there was Daniels, arms folded, jaw tight, pretending calm, but unable to mask the storm flickering beneath his eyes. "Commissioner," one of the senior officers finally said, clearing his throat. "Congratulations. We'll do our best to follow your lead." A few heads nodded. But not Daniels. He leaned back in his chair, a smirk tugging at his mouth, though it no longer reached his eyes. "So that's it, huh? We just fall in line? Pretend like you've been one of us all along?" The words dripped with disdain, laced with the arrogance of a man who had gotten away with far too much for far too long. Dickson's gaze locked on him. Calm, unblinking, unshaken. "No, Officer Daniels. You don't pretend. You change." The room stiffened. Daniels scoffed, shifting in his chair. "Change? I've been doing this job for 20 years. I know this city, these streets. I don't need some lecture from a man who—" He stopped himself, biting down on the rest of the sentence. But Dickson knew what he had been about to say. Everyone did. "Finish it," Dickson said quietly, his voice low but commanding. Say what you mean." The words landed like a dare. Daniel's throat bobbed. For the first time, the mask cracked. He glanced around the room, saw the watching eyes, the weight of expectation pressing in. His usual swagger deserted him, replaced by something closer to desperation. "I don't need to," he muttered. But Dickson leaned forward, his tone like steel. "No, you don't. Because I already know, and so does every officer in this room." He let the silence build, each second pulling tighter until the air itself felt ready to snap. Harry sat in the back, frozen. He could feel his pulse hammering in his ears. To see his father like this, firm, unyielding, cutting Daniels down without raising his voice, it was like watching a storm roll in, steady and unstoppable. Dickson straightened, his presence filling the room. "This department is going to change. Not tomorrow, not next year. Now. Every officer here will be held accountable for how they treat the people of this city. I don't care if it's a stranger on the street or a child on his way to school. Respect will not be optional. It will be the standard." His eyes locked on Daniels again. "And let me be very clear. If you cannot rise to that standard, you will not wear this badge another day." The words hit like a hammer. Daniel's face flushed red, his jaw tightening, his fists clenching on the table. For years, he had thrived on fear and intimidation, but now, the tables had turned. Now, he was the one on the defensive. The room held its breath, every officer waiting to see if Daniels would push back. But he didn't. Not this time. The weight of Dickson's authority pressed down too hard, too sure. Instead, Daniels muttered something under his breath, so low it barely carried. He leaned back, eyes darting toward Harry at the back of the room. And then, realization seemed to dawn. The boy he had mocked, belittled, humiliated, sitting here, watching, listening, protected by the very man now standing at the head of the table. Daniel's smirk withered. Dickson caught the glance and didn't let it pass. "That's right," he said firmly. "The boy you tried to break today is my son." Gasps rippled through the room, heads turned toward Harry, whose face burned but whose eyes stayed locked on his father. Dickson's voice grew sharper, each word a blade. "You thought you could humiliate him. You thought your badge gave you the right to demean him, to strip him of dignity. But let me tell you something, Officer Daniels. You don't speak for this department anymore. I do. And men like you will not decide who belongs and who doesn't. Not in my city, not in my command." The room was silent, stunned. Daniel sat frozen, stripped of the power he had once wielded so carelessly. His arrogance, his cruelty, exposed in the harshest light possible. Dickson let the silence linger, making sure the weight of his words sank into every corner of the room. Then, slowly, he leaned back, his tone steady once more. "Dismissed." Chairs scraped against the floor as officers rose, some quickly, some hesitantly. Daniels lingered, his pride dragging his movements, but even he couldn't resist the order. One by one the room emptied, leaving only Dickson and Harry. Harry sat frozen, staring at his father, the echo of his words still ringing in his ears. For so long Daniel's voice had haunted him, each insult branding itself into his memory. But tonight, something shifted. Tonight, those words had been drowned out by a stronger voice, his father's voice. And for the first time in days, Harry allowed himself to breathe deeply. The house was quiet that night. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that seemed to press against the walls, settling into every corner, every shadow. Harry sat at the kitchen table, his bike helmet resting in front of him like a reminder of the day's weight. His fingers traced the scratched plastic, following lines etched by years of rides, falls, and repairs. It had always been just a helmet to him before. Now it felt heavier, like a symbol of every word Daniels had thrown at him. The door creaked, and Dickson stepped inside. His jacket was still on, his face drawn but steady. He paused in the doorway, watching his son for a moment before speaking. "Mind if I sit?" Harry shook his head. His throat felt tight, but he managed a small, "Sure." Dickson lowered himself into the chair across from him. For a long time, neither spoke. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, steady and low. Then Dickson leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "What happened today? You didn't deserve that. Not one word of it." Harry swallowed, eyes still fixed on the helmet. He made it sound like, "I'll never be anything." His voice cracked, and he hated how small it sounded. Dickson reached across the table, laying a hand over his son's. "Listen to me, Harry. That man's words don't define you. They never have, and they never will. People like Daniels, they thrive on making others feel small because it's the only way they can feel big. But his cruelty says more about him than it ever will about you." Harry finally looked up. His father's eyes were steady, unwavering. There was no pity in them, only strength. "You are not hopeless," Dickson continued. "You are not going nowhere. You're mine, and you're going to rise higher than he can even imagine." The words landed like a balm on a wound Harry hadn't known how to heal. For the first time since the classroom, the sting of Daniel's laughter began to fade. Tears welled in his eyes, but he didn't hide them. Not tonight. Dickson squeezed his hand once more. "Hold your head high, son. Let today remind you of one thing. Not that men like Daniels exist, but that they don't win. Not when we stand tall, not when we know who we are." Harry nodded, his chest loosening, his breaths coming easier. For the first time in days, he felt lighter. Outside, the city hummed, unaware of the quiet victory unfolding in that kitchen. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new voices, maybe even new cruelties. But tonight Harry knew he wasn't alone. And with his father's words echoing stronger than Daniel's, he knew he never would be. Do you also believe that no one deserves to be treated in the way Officer Daniels treated Harry? Then ensure to subscribe and keep following stories like this.